Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to What's on the Playlist today. Today we'll talk about their Satanic Magesties request by the Rolling Stones, the image of which you will see here. Maybe getting sunny out, but it's still chilly. A little cold snap. This is the Rolling Stones' sixth studio album. It is the first Rolling Stones album that was released with the exact same track listing, both the US and the UK. And did fairly well in the charts initially. It reached number 2 in the US and number 3 in the UK. But it rapidly declined after its initial release. So let's talk about this a little bit. This was recorded in 1967, but due to drug busts and jail time, very few of the band members were actually all in the studio at the same time. Bill Wyman, who was hesitant to use drugs and was one of the more level-headed members of the group, basically went on to say that, like, you never knew, it was like the lottery, who was ever going to show up and what, if any, contribution they would have to the making of the album when they were actually there. Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, another band member's name I'm dropping, but like, they would just show up in an entourage, 6, 10, 12 people at a time, girlfriends, friends, and just nothing got done. This is also Rolling Stones kind of experiment into psychedelia or psychedelic rock. They had all kinds of different instruments that they never used before. Their manager and producer, Andrew Oldham, got so fed up with their behavior that he just quit. And this is the first band that the Rolling Stones produced by themselves, which Mick Jagger later said was a mistake. They were recorded. They said that basically like a month before release, they didn't have anything. With the chaos surrounding the recording, they didn't have anything coherent to put together. So they really just threw a bunch of stuff together, edited it so that it kind of made sense, and just threw the album out there. And in spite of its initial sales, which was kind of attributed to it just being a new Rolling Stones album, critics really hammered this album a lot, essentially saying it was just a chaotic piece of trash that, doesn't mean, not trash exactly, but, whatever good pieces were on this record, it was just, a lot of it was just noise. Both Keith Richards and Mick Jagger have both said of the album pretty much the exact same thing, different wordings, but there are pieces of the album that they like, that they think are good, but overall they just do not like this album. They said they at one point or another agreed this is their worst album. Of this album, there's only two songs they've ever played live. That is She's a Rainbow and 2,000 Light Years from Home. 2,000 Light Years from Home, Mick Jagger wrote in prison after a drug bust. I think it was in Brixton Prison in England. Sorry, my voice got scratchy all of a sudden, or right when I started to record. And She's a Rainbow is probably the song I know best in this album. It's got like a really catchy, light opening with a catchy, light piano piece. And it doesn't really fit the album well. It does sound a bit more like a traditional Rolling Stones piece, a little. It's still very happy and upbeat, and not at all like their more hard rock blues sound of their other records. Speaking of the band's behavior, Bill Wyman, the one who was frustrated with the band being like not present, he wrote In Another Land, which is on the album. A couple things about that song. He wrote it specifically to basically parody the band's behavior. The song was all about how the band was like just nonstop party, rock and roll, just irresponsible. He wrote the song In Another Land about the way the band was behaving. And Bill Wyman, this is the only song on this album written by Bill Wyman, and he has only ever actually written a total of 3 songs on the Rolling Stones albums in their entire career. So that does kind of stand out here. The story kind of goes that he drove into the studio and he was the only one who showed up, and he was really frustrated. And the guy in the recording booth was like, well, while you're here, have you got anything? He's like, well, I've been working on this thing. So, he played it and recorded it. I don't know if the band knew it was a parody of them. The rest of the band knew it was a parody of their behavior. But, they played it back for Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, and they liked it. Liked it enough to include it on the album. Another little tidbit, at the end of the song, there's a recording of someone snoring. And it is Bill Wyman snoring, the guy who wrote the song. Basically, he fell asleep in the studio one time when things were like, going on, and they put a microphone near him to record him snoring, and they kind of threw it on the end of the track as a joke to Bill Wyman. This is just reading about the making of this album. This is just unbridled rock and roll chaos of the '60s. It really, really is. This is textbook, rock and roll excessive rock and roll excess. If I can talk, I'm just still kind of giddy, chuckling to myself, reading all this background information about this album, because I really did just read it right before I came on here to record this. Yeah, this just makes me laugh about their behavior and about everything about the making of this album. This is actually one of the most divisive records in rock and roll history. Not controversial, because there are rock albums that are controversial because of their content and their subject matter. This is divisive because of how people think of the record. This album has some diehard fans who think it's one of the Rolling Stones' best albums. And then there are people who, like the critics of the day, it's like, this is just thrown together. This is like half the songs in this album are just thrown together garbage. So this, of this or any other era, this is one of the most divisive rock albums in the history of rock and roll because of this. But after the critical response to this album, Rolling Stones went back to their hard rock blues sounds going forward. They did not do any more experimental psychedelia. Another criticism of this album is that this was just a pretentious, self-pretentious piece trying to copy the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's. And I don't know how well you can see this, but there's just this really artsy collage of all a bunch of stuff, and there's them on the cover in little like uniforms or wizard outfits or whatever you're gonna call them. And it does really look like they're copying Sgt. Pepper's. It really, really does. I don't know if that was their intent. I know that there is one thing they did. I can't remember what it was, and I can't find it. Oh, I think it was with the cover. The initial idea for the cover was Mick Jagger naked on a cross. And people thought that was too much. But they finally settled on a lenticular image, and I don't know if anyone knows what that is. It's essentially where they use like clear ridge plastic on the image, and if you tilt the image one way, you see one image because you're looking at one of the ridges, and if you tilt it the other way, you see a different image because the ridges are facing a different way. So they had obviously it's not with this flat piece of paper, but they had this thick plastic lenticular image that you could look back and forth. And one of the images did have something to do with the Beatles. I don't remember what it was. So they did kind of that was directly a nod to Sgt. Pepper's, because on Sgt. Pepper's they had like a Cupid doll with a Rolling Stones shirt on, the little doll on the cover. So they did kind of do a nod to Sgt. Pepper's, but there was that in there. But it can be questioned whether or not they did the whole thing on purpose as a copy to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's. That's a lot, which I got through pretty quickly. For my own opinions, I tend to agree with the critics. There are a couple songs in this that I really like. She's a Rainbow I've always liked, but it's the only song on the album that I recognize. I know that the song The Lantern is by a lot of people considered Keith Richards' best guitar work on the album. Not necessarily his best guitar work in the history of the Rolling Stones, but a lot of people say that technically is one of the better songs on the album. Like I said, I do like the more traditional pieces, the experimental pieces, which are essentially sing this all together, Citadel, sing this all together, see what happens. You know, these really experimental pieces. I just didn't care for them. They didn't suck, but they didn't do anything for me either. They're not, you know, I'm not going to play this album, put this album on and listen to it over and over again. I could listen to She's a Rainbow a couple times in a row, which you know, if you've been listening to me or watching me for any length of time, you know that I don't like repeating songs over and over again. Just saying that I like them enough that I wouldn't mind. Yeah. She's a Rainbow, The Lantern, Gromper, 2000 Light Years from Home, In Another Land. I do like those songs. Of those, my favorite on the entire album is She's a Rainbow. But yeah, this is a piece. I mean, you have to give credit to the Rolling Stones for trying to experiment, you know. They experimented and it didn't work out, although knowing what I now know about the making of the album, I think if they weren't just all over the place, if they had actually shown up, prepared to work and put in the hours and effort to really make the album instead of just partying all the time and of course getting busted for drugs and spending time in jail, that didn't help either. You know, if this had been a cohesive effort, who knows what it could have been. This could have been a great album from start to finish. If they admit themselves that when their producer manager quit, they panicked and just threw shit together and put it out there, you know. And I mean, with their other work, you know, and there are some solid stuff, some solid work on the album, but they were just too chaotic. And like, you know, if they had done more traditional stuff, they probably had enough history that if they stuck with their traditional sound, even as, you know, rock excesses, you know, with the rock excess lifestyle they were living, they could have put out a more solid piece of work. But when you're experimenting, you really got to be there and put in the hours and the work and the effort to get it to do the thing you want it to do. I mean, Sgt. Pepper's is a great example. Yeah, the Beatles were high, but, you know, they were all there working together. The Rolling Stones were not working together on this album, and it shows. And the band admits it, and the band admits it, you know, this is not their best work. And specifically for Keith Richards and Mick Jagger, they think this is one of their worst albums. I don't know. I don't have their entire collection. This is actually the earliest. I don't have their first 5 albums. This is the first one. Not the first Rolling Stones album that I bought, but it is the earliest chronologically in my collection, which is why I'm starting with this one, as I traditionally tend to do. So, as always, my stuff is crap. Wait, oh, no, I'm out of order. As always, thanks for watching. As always, my stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.